Saturday. I hate cell phones. I hate, abhor, and despise them. You know, I just gave somebody my cell phone number. He says, oh, good, now I can call you. And I said, no, you can't. I never carry it around, and I never turn it on. Yeah, and I never check to see if I have voicemail. So, you know, calling me on my cell phone is an exercise in futility. I only have the cell phone with me and on if I know someone is going to call me. As I did yesterday. Now, you know, I'm here, Lynn Samuels, on Island Talk 540, WLIE, every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Next week is only till noon, but, you know, that's because of football. And I do a call-in segment on the morning show. You know, with Tracy and David on Friday mornings, you know, like 10 after 9. So I had this whole thing going on, you know, with the periodontia and gum surgery and blah, and, you know, 2 days last week at the dentist and all this junk. And I had to be at the dentist at 9 o'clock Saturday. So Eric Margolis, the producer of the morning show, says, oh, can't we call you at the dentist? And I said, yeah, great. Somebody's slicing my gums open. I really want to be talking on the radio. Well, no, maybe blah. So I bring the cell phone. I turn it on. They call me. I'm in the dentist's waiting room. And, you know, I'm talking, and there's one guy sitting in the waiting room. And he says to me, why don't you go outside with that? Now, let me tell you something. I hate when people talk on cell phones. And I was performing, so I probably was loud, you know. But even I, who will have a fight with a stranger at the drop of a hat, would it ever cross your mind to tell another person to get out of somewhere with a cell phone? Unless it was a movie or something. You know, if you're sitting at the opera or a movie and some idiot's on the cell phone, you'd say, shut up and get out. But in a dentist's waiting room? So I take this, I go, and I go outside, where we immediately lost the signal. I don't know whether they can hear me, you know. But we immediately lose, and I walk back in, and I say to this guy, you blanking blank. And he says, are you talking to me? You know, just like brilliance. Yet, no, I'm talking to the other, you know, there's nobody. I said, who the hell do you think you are? How dare you? And, you know, I use a few other expletive deleted. And he says, oh, you're some lady. This is what they always do when a woman gets mad and you curse at people. Oh, well, you're no lady. You know, and I said I'm no lady when I'm dealing with a blanking blank. Who do you think you are? Ordering everybody around. You know, what are you, the king of the universe? And then they called him into the dentist office. But I'm thinking how ironic. You know, I who hate cell phones more than anything, you know, have somebody yelling at me. And I'll tell you something else. Men. It's men. Because he thinks he's going to yell at me and tell me to take the phone outside. And then I'm not supposed to say anything. Why? Because you're like the big man, and I'm the woman. Oh, did they mess? He messed with the wrong person. And if I didn't like my dentist and I didn't realize he was another I wanted to I wanted to punch him. I really did. I mean, I'm not violent. I think I could get violent, but... And then the other thing that really peed me off. I'm in, you know, like some discount store in my neighborhood. You know, I get a really nice, thick chenille purple scarf, $3.99, very nice. And there's two cashiers, and I'm about to go to one, and she sneezes, and she puts her hands over her. Now, one of the things that annoys me is people who don't cover their mouth or nose when they sneeze. They're the ones on the subway. On the other hand, when somebody is a cashier and they're about to be handed something that you are then going to, you know, sort of wrap around your neck, and they have just sneezed into their hands, you want to puke. So I just sort of looked at her, and I waited for the other cashier next to her. And I don't know, I know that I was telling the story on the way, But it happened to me with National Airlines. Once they were going to check my bag, that extra search. And the guy sneezes into his hands, like the second before he's going to stick his hands in my luggage. And I say to him, here's a Kleenex, wipe your hands off. And he just got very huffy, and he finally just said, get on the plane. Like, there's something wrong with me. I'm sorry, I keep Purell in business. This is like a jungle. What is wrong with people? Number one, buy Kleenex. Carry a Kleenex. What is the big deal? So that you are not sneezing and coughing and spewing your bodily effluvia on other people. And then if you are going to cover your hands, don't do it like right before you touch my stuff. Oh, God, do you ever imagine what goes on in kitchen? Like you go to McDonald's, you go to restaurants. Oh, God. Oh, my God. I've worked in places where they serve food. You people don't want to know. Oh. It's probably a miracle that we're not all dead. So National Airlines went out of business this week. I was thinking I probably could talk for an hour about National Airlines. National Airlines. Now, I've only been flying for 3 years, and I've really only flown about 4 or 5 different airlines. But it was by far, but I think the best. I think even better than JetBlue. Cheap fare on National to Las Vegas, non-stop. That's the first thing I did when I read that they went out of business is I went on Expedia and Orbitz and everything, for the next time we want to go to Las Vegas. And I'm thinking, what's going to happen? What is it going to cost? And I remembered for the first time I went, I didn't take National. I don't think I knew about it. There is no such thing as a non-stop flight from New York to Las Vegas. They stop in St. Louis. The first time I went, I now get to say I've been in Texas, because I was in the Dallas airport for an hour. That counts. I have a T-shirt that says Dallas. But National, just straight, cheap fare, wonderful people working for them, except for the guy who sneezed into his hands, First class, which I got to fly a couple of times, when somebody else won. Certainly was never me. Somebody else won. Fabulous. First class, they fed you. And it's 5 hours, New York, Las Vegas. They fed you the whole 5 hours. There was not a minute that they weren't feeding you in first class. Just a marvelous, marvelous airline. So this is America. So they went out of business. Unbelievable. They provided a service at a decent price to people who wanted it. They're out of business. Believe me, another small airline that I thought was a discount, I won't say their name, you never know who may be thinking of advertising Frontier. Because I tend to travel at the last minute. Somebody will say, let's go to Las Vegas. And that's very bad, because then you're paying the most. But National was never expensive. Even at the last second, it was not expensive. So I'm looking, it's like $1,400. Well, I'm saying, I'll never go to Vegas again. Who can afford that? And then every airline that lays over, there are flights from New York to Las Vegas where you literally, they go to Los Angeles, and you have to wait and then go back to Las Vegas. For $250, though, that's the beauty of that. But it's instead of 5 or 6 hours, they're like, it's 9 hours. It's flying out of your way, going back. What happened to National Airlines, which was, they called themselves the hometown airline of Las Vegas. They went into bankruptcy. They had really bad timing. They went bankrupt in, I believe it was December of 2000. So when 9/11 happened, in 2001, and what was the first thing the Congress did? They said $15 billion for the airlines, right? They said, but not you, National, because you were already bankrupt before. So they wouldn't give them any of that money. And then more recently, when they said we need like a 2 million, 2 billion, they needed a loan guarantee from the government. Not money, a loan guarantee. And the government said no. So here is a low-priced, consumer-friendly, wonderful airline that everybody who flew national loved it. And I'm with the head of the airline. The government put them out of business. Why? Because I guess they weren't giving enough money to the politicians. Could that be it? You know, all these other airlines with their lobbying groups, so I guess National just wasn't greasing the right palms. So they basically just put them out of business, but then National screwed everybody. Because they just on Wednesday at like 4 o'clock, they said, we're out of business, goodbye. And stranded people. And some of the workers, they didn't warn the workers, and the workers just left, and there were people who had checked bags already for planes that were never going to take off. But the fact is, this government put that airline out of business. And the casinos could have helped them. I mean, that's another thing. The casinos probably could have helped them. It's really a sad state of affairs. You know, and I know people would say, well, they didn't have a good business plan. They finally, the other pathetic thing is, I think it was August, was the first time they made a profit. They were finally making a profit. And if the government had given them that loan guarantee, which is all going to, you know, American Airlines, all the big ones. So I, for one, am going to miss them. I really am. I think it's terrible. All right, so we've gotten through the important stuff, so I'll tell you about the martial law coming to this country, maybe, after this. He's going to say who I am. I don't have to say who I am. This is Island Talk 540 WLIE.
Lynn Samuels on Island Talk 540 WLIE 955-5400.
Thinking divorce?
Lynn Samuels on Island Talk 540 WLIE 955-5400.
Okay, we're back. Time is running out. If you have anything to say, time is running out here. We have 34 more minutes or so, you know, with a couple of breaks, so it's even less. 955-5400. 516-631-9555-400. I am Lynn Samuels, Lynn. I have a .com, lynnsamuels.com. Although you're not going to be able to get on it from like 10 o'clock tonight to like 8 o'clock in the morning because they're screwing the whole thing. Hopefully not. And lynnsamuels@hotmail.com is my email. And the email here is islandtalk540.com. You can talk in my ear. If I ask you a question, that's all right. .com. Okay, Island. So that's where you can email like here and just tell them how fabulously brilliant they were to hire me. That's what you, or you can say, you know, what is that, you know, left-wing Israel-hating, George Bush-hating, you know, miserable bitch doing on your radio station. You could say that. I'm all for free speech, unlike other people, unlike the right wing, you know, who seems to think that the only people who should be allowed to speak are them. You know, I don't care. Say what you want. All right, now, do you people know what burying the lead means? No, it doesn't mean taking George Clooney and, you know, putting him 6 feet under. It means when the main point, or what I would consider to be the main point of a news story, is not the headline, it's not in the first paragraph, it's buried somewhere in the middle of the story. That's burying the lead, you know, which is a matter of opinion, mostly. Which is, it's like that story yesterday where the AP had kept saying, boy shot to death at Missouri school. Which leads you to go, oh my God, more mayhem and more this and more that. And although it was terrible that this little boy was shot to death, which indeed he was, it was one of those crazy things where his insane father, you know, it wasn't a random thing. It was the kid's nutty father was fighting with the mother. So the father comes and kills the kid. So that was, I would have said boy shot to death by father. Just so that people wouldn't think, we had more snipers. These two guys who now it seems have committed every crime in America. Do you realize if those snipers had not stayed in one place and started killing all those people right around Washington, that they could have gone back and forth across the country forever? Nobody ever would have connected these. All right, so this is a story from today's Washington Times, which I have posted. U.S. ready to hit Iraq quickly. That's their headline. And it's, what is it? It's a little more than 2 pages. And I am not going to read the whole thing. No bedtime stories on this show. It starts, the U.S. military would be prepared to strike Iraq within weeks if Saddam Hussein violates the terms of the new UN resolution. Which they're going to say he did violate them, whether he violates them or not. So what's the point? They're dead, you can do it quickly, blah, blah, blah. And how they're going to do it. Now, they start quoting retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Oh, retired? Okay. So maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. We can only hope. Because this retired Lieutenant Army Colonel Robert McGinnis says, we'd be in place by about the first or second week in December. That's given the assumption the president, now listen to this carefully, is going to activate the reserve and the guard to provide domestic security. Now, the Army, the Reserve, the National Guard, the Army itself is not supposed to be providing national security under posse comitatus, which this administration certainly seems to want to get rid of. The National Guard can provide domestic security, and I guess, when you walk through all the airports, and there were the Reserve, and you walk through Penn Station, getting to and from the Long Island Railroad. But this is given the assumption the president's going to activate the Army Reserve and the National Guard in this country? Saddam has plenty of agents inside the country. And they are ready to create domestic disturbances to detract attention from what's going on in Iraq. That won't be activated until Saddam sees hostilities are imminent. Now, I can only hope that this man, this retired lieutenant colonel that they're quoting in this story, doesn't know what he's talking about. Because if you really think about what he's saying, first of all, he said, Saddam Hussein has cells in this country. Oh, please. This is like the boogeyman theory. And he's gonna, did Saddam Hussein ever cause any trouble in this country? Did he ever have cells? Did he ever create domestic? Where does this come from? And then there's going to be the Reserve and the National Guard. I don't like this because all this tells me, this is as if we're going to end up under martial law if we go to war in Iraq. The most ironic thing I ever saw, CNN had a thing, it says, countdown to Iraq. And then underneath it says, Vietnam Memorial. Because this is what, the 20th or 25th anniversary of the wall. So they're standing there reading the name of 57,000 dead American soldiers, while this imbecile, who 3 years ago couldn't have told you where Iraq was. Well, maybe he knew Iraq. Is starting another war. Oh, Steve, I hurt your feelings. Steve on your cell phone.
Lynn.
Hi. Did I hurt your little libertarian feelings, darling?
Well, no, I'll tell you, I'm like your number one fan after Kathy, but I hear myself in echo, but that's all right. Every few months you say this stuff about the Libertarian Party. It's nothing like the Republican Party. They're nothing like each other.
You want smaller government, both of you.
The Republicans claim they want smaller government, but they don't.
I know, but that's what I have against you. You really do. You close my public library.
Well, that library thing's a red herring. I have a couple things here. Just for example, like the Patriot Act. The Republicans are for that. Libertarians are against it.
Well, that's a good thing.
Same for the war with Iraq. Same for terrorism insurance for corporations. Same for the cigarette tax. And same for eminent domain. You used to have to give land to corporations. Same for the 21-year-old drinking age. You go on and on. I just wanted to point out there's like a whole load of differences.
And you guys like to smoke dope.
Nah. Actually, I hardly ever did, but...
But you think people should have the right?
Yeah, definitely they should have the right.
Well, you know, that came up for a vote in 3 states. Nevada, and I forget the other 2, basically to legalize pot, and lost in all 3 states, even in Nevada.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. And the Libertarian parties, at least in the Nevada state referendum, were involved in that and trying to get it passed. But, I mean, the encouraging thing is that the medical marijuana referendums have all passed, and the ones that failed this last election for regular marijuana, they didn't fail by that much, I don't think. So
I don't know. I actually never looked it up. The stories I read just said, you know, they didn't pass anywhere.
And you know what happened in Nevada? Bush, because anything the federal government does, it's all under Bush, you know. And he was using taxpayer money to campaign against that referendum in Nevada. He sent his people in there and bought loads of advertising to campaign against it. So, I mean,
well, because the federal government doesn't even allow medical marijuana in the states that have allowed it, you know, because they say, again, this government that yells half the time they want states' rights. You know, when the states pass medical marijuana, then the federal government says, well, you know, states' rights don't count. Only the federal law counts now, you know, now that it's convenient for us.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I mean. The Republican Party, I think they're just like the Democratic Party.
Well, and I think the Democrats are just like the Republic. You know, we really sort of agree on that. But I like to insult people. You know, what can I tell you? I like to insult the Libertarians.
I know you do.
And the Republicans and the Democrats. The thing is, I'll tell you the party I hate the most. The Democrats. Because they're supposed to be my party, you know, but they're a bunch of spineless, whining wimps.
Yeah, you know, when they had that thing for the 21-year-old drinking age where, it was a DUI thing where they lowered the level, but the federal government said we're going to take away state funding if they don't lower it to a very low level. I mean, ridiculously low. It was unanimous in the Senate. Everyone, all the Republicans,
I know,
all the
they're
Democrats.
all a bunch of spineless, whining wimps. Thank you for calling, but I have to go to a break. Although the study came out yesterday that even 0.4 alcohol impairs your judgment. It's like 1 beer and your judgment is impaired. And I don't think my aunt got killed, you know, by what we think now is a drunk driver. So I don't think people should be driving drunk. But you know something? Most people are so stupid, their judgment is impaired just walking around. They don't even need a drink.
Lynn Samuel. Pick up the phone and give Lynn Samuels a call on Island Talk 540 WLIE 955-5400.
I noticed something interesting. More people start calling at the end. Although next week you better, you know, be paying attention, because next week it's 10 to noon. All right, Jim in Virginia, hi.
Hey, Lynn, how you doing?
Okay, what are you listening on the internet in Virginia, I guess?
Well, I couldn't get through on the internet, but I've been at your website, and it's just appalling. There's photos of the C-130 transport. Seems like we got
why is it because of the way we were treating the prisoners.
Yeah, you know, alleged prisoners.
Well, do you know that one of the Guantanamo prisoners that they let out
Right.
was 100 years old?
No.
And I just read that. Now, the pictures, for people who don't know what you're talking about, is Art Bell, put on artbell.com, but I have it on my website.
And it was on
Last night, and then Drudge picked it up. Pictures taken by somebody on these transport planes taking the prisoners, you know, to Guantanamo, and they're all tied up and lying on the floor. Now, you know what I don't understand, Jim?
Yes.
These pictures go up on Art Bell's website, and you know, I think people know he does, you know, it's not on the station, but he does a syndicated show, and he talks about flying saucers and, you know, ghosts, and you know, and he was the one who kept yelling about Y2K. Thank you for bringing it up, Jim. You know, the whole world was going to come to an end and he was discredited. I love art, but you know. So people tend to think he's a wacko. So he puts these pictures up, which you can see if you go to my website or artbell.com, or I think Drudge still has them up too, of the prisoners, you know, on the C-130s being taken to Guantanamo. And it really looks terrible. But wouldn't it have made sense? And then all of a sudden yesterday, the story comes out over the AP that the Pentagon is investigating who leaked the photos. And I'm thinking, how stupid can the Pentagon be? You know, but we all know the answer to that. Pretty stupid. Because they may want to know who leaked the photos. But by publicly coming out and saying, we, the Pentagon, are really annoyed, and we're going to investigate this, they are now saying to everybody, these photos are real. They are legitimate. These are really the photographs of the prisoners being taken by the Army to Guantanamo. When I am fairly gullible, but I have learned one thing since I've been on the internet. What is that, about 3 years since I've been on the internet? Don't believe a thing. You can't believe anything on the internet. I mean, you can believe my website, you know, Drudge, stuff that's linking to, you know, the Associated Press. That's all I do. You know, and that's, you know, the Drudge Report. You know, he does some of his own stories. You know, I think we know now he's a credible source. But for the most part, how can you believe anything on the internet? I get stuff sent to me in emails. You know, I mean, all kinds of things. And if I can't, I mean, I am so careful with my website. You know, there are so many conspiracy theories. Oh, man, I love all the conspiracies. You know, George Bush really was in the plane that flew in to the World Trade Center, and the George W. we see now is just you know, they sent him out. He's a cyborg or a robot or something.